neurodiversity, topic of the day. I don't even know where to start with this one, but I think we should start it with Tori being our guest of honour.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for having me.
All the way from down the other end of the office.
Yeah, from my desk over there.
Lovely. I'm alright.
Good.
It's a good little intro. We're going to be talking to you about neurodiversity, but more just where you actually have some experience in this, just to kind of chat around what you've actually experienced ultimately, because I must admit it's a very new thing even for me.
Yeah.
And not a subject that I've really an expert in, and I don't know if there are any experts in there, but it would just be interesting to see like how you've, I suppose, got into this kind of space, what you've been exposed to, and actually what the benefits kind of are, because I think that's the big question in my mind is, you know, okay, we want to kind of be a more diverse workforce, to include a lot more people, which is fantastic, but how do we do that?
I think that's where everyone struggles
right
when it comes to neurodiversity. I mean, I can start by saying I'm in no way an expert on the topic either, but I have experience both working with neurodivergent children and also supporting neurodivergent adults into employment. So I suppose I can bring some knowledge.
So you gave me some notes on this. 5 years worth of experience working with neurodivergent adults and children, both development, education needs and supporting into employment.
Yeah.
That's kind of when you started after that working with Northreach anyway, wasn't it?
Yes.
4 years working with charities that are government funded, which is interesting. I didn't even know that was even a thing until we spoke.
Yeah.
And a lot of this is to support individuals with disabilities, but again, with the view to get them into work.
Yeah.
It's really what it, wasn't it? And including more physical and mental disabilities as well as neurodivergent people.
Yeah.
I think I'll be quite keen just to ask you a question. What is a neurodivergent person?
That's very
Because you can't. Is it like
answer.
a topic of people or like?
I would say the best way to kind of clarify is it's a term that kind of refers to the natural variations of the human brain.
Okay.
So it's different people that see things in different ways and respond to things in different ways. So there's not necessarily one type of neurodiversity. Don't get me wrong, there are some really common types of neurodiversity that we are aware of, that we know about, that are very much public knowledge, things like ADHD, autism, dyslexia, but overall it's the way people view the world, the way people cope in the world, their perspective of things, how they cope with things.
So what was your actual job? Because I know I've heard this story anyway, but I'd be quite keen just to kind of take us back. You kind of got this job and you were sold you need to help these people to get into work. I mean, how did you do that?
Worked on government funded projects on behalf of charities, and the aim of these projects was to support people into employment, either with a physical disability, mental disability, or a person who is neurodiverse that needs that support. And my job really was to touch on everything employment related with them. So it might be someone, for example, I worked with the candidate, he hadn't worked in 20 years, he had ADHD, autism, a few different mental health problems as well. So with this candidate, for example, it was to kind of initially meet with him, do a skill assessment, kind of talk about his interests, what's he good at, because at this point he didn't even know what he wanted to do. He was like, I just know I want to get back into employment, I feel ready now, but I need the support.
Because that's a big thing to start with, isn't it? Like a skills assessment rather than, a competency-based kind of questioning, more open, broad things. It's just really kind of get them to do more assessments over particular subjects or. So it
would initially just start with what do you think you're good at? What have you done before? What did you do when you were previously in employment? Would review their kind of his previous experience and what he enjoyed about that experience, what he didn't enjoy, things that personally he felt he was good at, so hobbies, things that he enjoyed doing in his spare time, and from there we would then pull skills like organisation, creativity, like if someone says, oh, I really like to draw and I'm really creative in my spare time, then we go, okay, well, look, what can we where can we take this? How can we, you know, get you into a role that you're really passionate about, that you love, that you're going to kind of stay in, and that's going to benefit you in the long run. So we'd do those skill assessments. We'd kind of find out a route of where we wanted to go. As someone, you know, this candidate, as someone that's hasn't worked in 20 years, as I'm sure you can imagine, the market had changed a lot in 20 years. How to apply for jobs had changed.
Yeah.
Kind of salaries had changed, processes had changed. So it was kind of taking him through like a step-by-step process of like, this is what we do now. So I supported him with writing his CV. I supported him with learning how to use a computer, learning about specific job sites, learning about what jobs are out there. So we'd sit together and research different types of jobs. After making his CV, I'd support him with the application forms and what to write, you know. And on that, touching on application forms, comes the advice on disclosure as well, which is really important kind of when you're discussing neurodivergent kind of people.
Yeah.
As I'm sure you've seen before, when you submit an application form, you can disclose mental, physical disabilities, neurodiversities. Is that the wrong way to put word to? Sorry, I've just. Is that the wrong? Neurodivergence. I'll start again. So as I'm sure, closer. So as I'm sure you've seen, when you do an application form, you can disclose physical disabilities, mental disabilities, and if you're neurodivergent or not. So that's when we kind of have a really interesting discussion about whether a candidate wants to disclose.
Yeah, because that's got to be a big thing anyway, isn't it?
Massively.
If they actually want to do it.
Yeah, because not only are
They
there...
don't have to, do they?
No, there's absolutely no legal requirement for somebody to disclose.
It kind of touches on the kind of diversity and inclusion part as well. If you know, is the external viewpoint that if I actually disclose this information, is it going to be held against me?
Exactly.
And sometimes on the flip side, is it going to something that may even go in my favour? Because companies need to be diverse and inclusive. Yeah, exactly. So that balancing act is probably quite interesting as well.
Yeah, there are definitely misconceptions around neurodiversity, and candidates are very much aware of that, and that's when you have that kind of crucial conversation of, do you want to disclose this to your employer? Would kind of advise them, give them information on the Equality Act 2010. Would have this conversation around disclosing, because if a candidate does disclose when applying and they do secure the job, then the employer has a kind of legal expectation,
or at least an
and
obligation.
a legal obligation and a moral obligation to support, to put amendments and things in place to support the candidate. But if they secure the role and they hadn't disclosed, and the role doesn't work out because of something to do with their neurodiversity, you know, maybe it's a really overwhelming environment, maybe it's a I mean, there's countless reasons, but if something doesn't work out because the employer hasn't supported the candidate's neurodiversity, they don't really have a leg to stand on, because
Why isn't the employer?
The candidate doesn't have a leg to stand on because they didn't disclose it. Yeah,
of course.
The employer isn't intentionally being what's the word?
I suppose they're not discriminating against.
They're not. That's it. They're not intentionally discriminating. They're unknowingly discriminating, and they can't. So we'd have really interesting conversations about disclosure. We would then do some interview prep, and obviously in that there's a lot of confidence building, making sure the candidate's feeling really ready for the interview. Their knowledge on the company and the role is really strong. There were times when candidates that weren't as good with a computer, I'd walk the streets with them and hand their CVs into stores and businesses, and we'd kind of do it in a kind of a face-to-face way. But yeah, really.
Did that get like a good reaction, or was it mixed? I heard that. That must be something else.
Yeah, it's interesting. It depends on the role, really. Retail, for example, they're generally quite open to accepting CVs.
Anyway.
Yeah. But something like an office role is much harder to kind of walk in and, central London, someone wants to work in admin and walking into a big bank or office building, and there's a receptionist there's a gatekeeper, and it's really hard to kind of get that across. But we did it, and generally there was good success.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Just a thought I just had in terms of, when I said about helping prep the candidate for the interview, but are you also helping prep the employers for the interview as well? Because like you kind of said, it's quite new, it's it's no one's, an out and out expert, in the general market. It's not something that's really widely spoken about.
Yeah.
So it must be interesting actually helping prepare an interviewer to say this is the kind of amendments that you need to make to kind of facilitate this.
Well, that's down to whether the candidate has disclosed or not. And you'd be surprised, so many candidates didn't want to disclose because of the fear of that prejudgment and that misconception that people have. That there were a lot of candidates, just based on my experience, are concerned that their neurodiversity won't be seen as a strength; it'll be seen as a weakness. But very much so, if a candidate wants to disclose, we would support the employer in kind of understanding how they can support the candidate, if that makes sense.
And that's really interesting. It's interesting you said about people see it as a weakness, because there are so many benefits to employing people that are neurodivergent. You kind of spoke about it's like creativity and that kind of hyper focus, attention to detail. I think I actually saw a stat about the most successful people in the world, and I think a lot of them are crossing the lines of being neurodivergent in terms of that hyper focus of wanting to achieve it and really focusing in on that attention to detail as well. Especially if you look at things like science and tech and just that's those kind of STEM positions particularly.
I think that is definitely one positive that everyone's trying to kind of like identify is if you have someone that is neurodiverse, we don't understand enough about kind of the brain, how these things work anyway, and everyone's on a different kind of level of it, but there is a movement to say if you have more of a neurodiverse kind of workforce, it can lead to more creativity, more inspirational kind of thoughts, because it's a completely different way of thinking about problems and solutions and way to do things. So there's a lot of benefit there, but I think that is ultimately nearly an end goal to it, to say that's how we can be inclusive and be equal in it. But then it's understanding how on earth, as an employer, has never hired anyone that like this previously. How can you say, well, if you just hire them, it's going to make your business better, it's going to kind of apart from ticking a box, surely it's got to be a point where it's like, okay, how do we kind of help people understand the benefits of this initially to then build to that, and I think that's all about creating this understanding and awareness of neurodiversity and what I think that really is probably a massive part of it, right?
Massive. Don't get me wrong, I think as a society we've come, once again I'm not an expert, but I think we've come a really long way in terms of our understanding of neurodiversity, and I think schools are better at recognising it now and supporting it, which I think helps individuals kind of learn how to support themselves as they grow. I think social media is fantastic for kind of promoting kind of knowledge and inclusion. I think like if you look at TikTok now, like there are so many accounts run by neurodiverse people, and it shows it kind of banishes all those misconceptions of it. I think as a society it's really informative to be able to see that, but I agree from an employment perspective there's a lot more that needs to be done. Because I think you're right, I think it's easy to tick a box and okay we've hired someone with autism, we've done that, but then what next? And I think it's about educating staff. I think it's about also kind of communicating with that individual. What's worked for you in the past, what can we do, what can we put in place to make sure that we're supporting you as much as possible. And I think it's about having that ongoing conversation and communication to make sure that person is being supported at all times.
Because I think that's the next step, is that it's the environment. It's not just we've hired someone who's neurodivergent, whatever that may be, but it's okay, what steps are you now putting in place to enable them to do the best work that they can do and get the best out of that person. So if they are super creative, they've got these outside of the box thoughts, what do you need from them? What do you need to do to enable them to be in the best environment as you would any other member of staff? It's no different to a physical disability. If someone's in a wheelchair, you need to make it accessible. How do you do that for neurodiversity, which isn't an overnight thing that we can fix tomorrow, but it's constantly evolving, and like you said, just speaking to people and understanding what works for them.
Every person's needs are so different as well. What could really work for one person with ADHD could really not work for another person with ADHD. And amendments and I can't remember the official word for it, but things that employers can put in place could be so simple, but could really make a difference and a huge impact on someone who is neurodiverse. For example, if you think about our office, we're salespeople, we're often very buzzy, it's very loud, there's a lot going on. A common trait of autism can be being really overwhelmed by lots of noise, lots of people. It could be as simple as an employer providing a set of soundproof headphones, and that makes a world of difference to their performance, their ability to come to work. It's about having the resources and communication.
And again, and understanding, isn't it? I suppose to kind of, like you said, understand what each individual kind of need is, and then just working with that. And I don't think it's an overnight thing. I think disability in the physical sense has kind of got decades of kind of advancement in trying to accommodate that, and this genuinely is more of a concern now than it probably has ever been spoken about before. It's probably always been there, but it's changing so quickly now. And I think that's great, because I do genuinely remember that when I was younger, that if you had like autism or ADHD, or if you had Tourette's, it was just like
different.
You were just different. It wasn't really included. You were just seen as a completely different individual, and really a lot of people wouldn't really know how to deal with that.
They're always they could always be seen as the children that were harder to deal with, harder to support. And actually, a lot of the time, if you just take the time to understand what they need and what helps them, they're not hard to support. They're not hard to understand. They're not. But 100%.
But I think that's it. I think there's a couple of things that I kind of looked at with this, and first was embracing it and actually realising it is a thing. It is a neurological kind of disability and it should be just treated as well if you are completely disabled in a wheelchair. It's no different. Not all disabilities are created equally, or ones that you can see. So I think that's the first thing to kind of go, we can accept that there is people out there that can be super creative, super kind of talented, given the right resources and the right environment. And then I think it's more just about educating yourself as whoever, an employer. In the case of a lot of our work that we do is always going to come down to employment, and I think it's about just educating individuals and ourselves really, in terms of, okay, if we have these individuals we're working with, again, how do we support it, how do we ensure that we're doing the best we can, and then promote it. I think promoting that and kind of inclusive and accepting that is really quite good, and celebrating some of that success. And I think that's what we'll see a lot more of, is individuals that hire neurodivergent individuals and celebrate where those successes have been. And I think that could be quite a powerful way to start breaking the mould and challenge that stereotype, right?
Definitely. I think challenging, like you said earlier, kind of going back to, the playground. Even now, how many people at later life are now kind of going, okay, I'm more aware of it, I'm kind of understanding a little bit, and then going, actually, I'm attributing a lot of these traits to myself, and then finding out that they themselves are, because I think as well, it's a spectrum, right? It's not yes or no, you're neurodivergent or you're not. Sometimes it's where do you fit on that spectrum, and a lot of people later in life are kind of finding that as well.
Well, dyslexia is a huge one, right? That's got to be a massive one. I think technology can help this hugely, but definitely. I think maybe siloing dyslexia to a point really, but I think you think amount of different apps and supportive things you have, and writing text and receiving text now on mobile phones and laptops and things. There's very limited reasons why you should spell things on a computer, but reading's different. To actually read is so different. But again, fonts and the way things are done and the accessibility in websites is contributing to a more inclusive way to ingest information. But when it kind of comes to spellings and things like that, I mean, technically you don't really need to spell anymore, do you? It's quite a controversial thing to say, but you don't, do you? Because there's enough technology around you to kind of go, well, just chuck it into Word and it'll correct it for you. Or you've got apps like Grammarly, ChatGPT.
Autocorrect when you type a text. There's so much that goes into it. And I think as well, I think, again, I'm not an expert, I'm not trying to claim to be, but I think I've seen that if the first and last letter is correct, whatever the letters are in the middle,
I've seen this.
Your brain will automatically try and correct it.
It almost kind of jumbles it around. And you'll always kind of see it. I think it's the first and last letters.
As long as the first and last letters are the same, whatever letters are in the middle, can be in any order, your brain will automatically try and correct it.
Incredible, isn't it?
Yeah. So it's really interesting just how the brain works, and there's so much research that goes into it, and they're always making more and more progress. That there's probably things now that we look at and go, okay, that's different, we don't quite understand it, but in 10, 15, 20 plus years, what is that now going to look like, and what's the landscape for this going to look like in the future, and how will technology play a part in that as well?
I think it will do. I think it has to. It seems to be where a lot of advancements are being made in like healthcare anyway, and this will just be another kind of add-on to it. And if it supports people getting back into work, moreover, then great. I think it does that. It's just going to come down to the point of, first of all, just accepting and embracing that is a thing, and then thinking about how you can support individuals in whatever way they need.
Yeah,
definitely.
Being open to providing that tech or providing those resources and supplying what's needed.
Yeah, and working towards it. I don't necessarily think people need to listen to this and kind of go, okay, we'll go out and we'll try and hunt down some, folk that be able to fit into this box. It should just be more, we're aware that it exists and we won't kind of shy away from it if it does come.
Yeah.
And it might not be to necessarily say you do it right first time.
Yeah.
I think that's the other thing, because it is a journey and you have to learn along the way.
Definitely. You can't get it right overnight. It's not something that you can kind of go out and target as such either. Like you said, you can't be biased towards saying, well, we have to hire someone who's neurodivergent to fit this box, and just say, well, we've done it. It needs to be natural as well, because otherwise you can kind of feel it. When it's forced. That's another kind of issue as well in terms of... Yeah,
I think that'd be even worse, because if you're kind of just doing it, and then how do you support them if you're just kind of put in a position where you just have to or feel obliged to, but you haven't been given the tools to actually kind of, again, give that person the best environment possible to do their work. That's only going to knock their confidence.
Yeah.
And again, go back into that world of not being included, I'm different, and no one wants to kind of hire someone like me.
Yeah. No one wants to kind of feel like I'm only being hired because of this.
Yeah.
It should be an enhancement.
Did you see any of that when you was doing it? Did people kind of go like, no one would want to hire me because of this?
Massively.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is, once again, goes back to that disclosure conversation, because people didn't want to disclose either their physical disability, mental disability, their neurodiversity, because there is that, and actually
stigma.
There is that stigma. There massively is that stigma, and a lot of people are very aware of it. They're all, as I said, I think as a society we've come on a long way, but still there's a long way to go, and neurodiverse people are still very much aware that there is that stigma, and there's that fear of, no, they won't want to hire me because they think I'm going to be too hard to support, too hard to deal with. They think I'm not going to be good at the job. They think I'm going to be too over the top. A common misconception of like ADHD is, I'm too energetic, I've got too much to say, I'm too loud, I take up too much space. If they know that I've got it, then that they won't want to hire me, or they'll be put off hiring me because I'm too much. And that's not me saying ADHD people are too much, but there is that common kind of misconception with it. There is that stigma with it. Similarly with autism, sometimes people with autism find it harder to communicate, find social skills a little bit harder, and what so many employers promote is good teamwork, good communication skills, good at kind of contributing and towards not just the role but the culture of the company. And so it was so common to see people kind of be not necessarily put off of applying, but definitely put off of disclosing, because of those stigmas.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I can imagine as well that when you're kind of actually approaching these companies, quite cold, right? Just kind of going, are you hiring? This is someone's CV.
Yeah.
I can imagine that there's be a lot of knockback even from employers that aren't aware and aren't familiar, equipped, like you said, or don't have that awareness, that maybe are, not as forward thinking, a little bit closed off, kind of having that pushback as well.
And we did provide trainings to employers that even we weren't necessarily recruiting with, but wanted to learn more and wanted to build on their knowledge of neurodiversity and how to support disabilities in general. And we provided training on how simple it can actually be, And you know, we tried to kind of break down those stigmas and those misconceptions about neurodiversity, and how, yeah, as I said, how easy it can be to support, and how a lot of the time neurodiversity is neurodiversities can have benefits, you know, they can have stronger skill sets, they can be more determined, more focused, more but better attention to detail, you know.
More accepting just in society.
I
mean, that's another thing, isn't it? Because from a work perspective it's one, but it doesn't start and end at 9 to 5, does it?
No.
If they've kind of got that disorder, some of them for the rest of their lives. So again, in any kind of capacity to be able to kind of support that and embrace it and help, that's only got to kind of benefit the world in the actual idea of, if we can include these individuals in a society, that's got to be better for everyone's well-being.
Massively, yeah. Especially for, like you said, it's not just a 9 to 5. It doesn't. Your responsibilities as an employer don't just stop at, you know, when you walk out the door. You know, it's that person's well-being.
I wish it did sometimes.
I'm sure. But even like, you know, people's general well-being, it's actually being invested in people and wanting the best for them. To get the best out of them at work, you need to kind of support them outside of work as well, right? That work-life balance. There comes a lot, you know, there's certainly a line where it's intrusive, but kind of giving them all the support that they need as much as you can.
And creating a comfortable space where it doesn't have to be intrusive, where someone feels comfortable enough that if they need something, they can come to you. You know, I think that's really important.
Without that judgment.
Without judgment, You know, having those strong relationships and that open communication where someone can just say, oh, actually, I've noticed I'm really struggling with this at the moment. Is there anything we could do about it? Or this is what I would need that would really help me. And then it doesn't need to be as intrusive. It's,
Definitely. There's certainly a lot there. There's certainly a lot to be done.
There's a lot.
There is a lot to be done. I think that's kind of the whole purpose of this talk today anyway, was just to kind of take that first step in acknowledgement of really that it is a thing. We're definitely going to see more of it, I believe, as the kind of days and weeks and months kind of roll by, because others will start kind of voicing their own disorders and what they're kind of living with, and it shouldn't be kind of taken as like a hindrance. It should be something we can embrace and kind of go, right, how can that be added as a benefit somewhere along the line? And that's the piece, isn't it? Because if you categorically knew, if you hired someone with a specific whatever it may be, that they are just naturally more creative and can do things a lot more engineering focused, to be a coder or do something that's, you would embrace that 1,000,000%. It's just that knowing. It's just that understanding, and actually being a bit of a trailblazer, and actually kind of stepping outside of that kind of, oh, we don't really know or want to engage in that, and then finding a new route. And I think that's something the world's trying to do anyway. So many kind of different startups and different kind of organisations now that want to be known to be a disruptor and all the rest of it. But that kind of means if you need to disrupt everything, the way you do it, how, and find new roads, and that's where the innovation should come from. Why not?
Yeah, no, exactly. It's not just pushing out. We do things differently in terms of the product or the way we work, but it's how we, you know, how do we actually work differently as a culture, and as a kind of, the words completely escape my mind, but you know, atmosphere.
The environment, the culture, the vibe, you know. I think that's really kind of breaking new ground, isn't it? If you could actually walk into a room and you don't look around and see 20 other faces that look like you, and they all come from different places, different genders, different cultures, different
ways of thinking, different sort of outlooks on life in general.
But that's the whole kind of definition of trying to be diverse and inclusive, and the whole kind of point around that is that having a more diverse and inclusive workforce will create more kind of creativity, because of different points of view, different people's backgrounds, and that collectively will have a lot better impact on businesses, on decision making, because you can get a collective, or a vast collective amount of views. Whereas if you had a whole lot of people, same background, same education, same everything, you're only going to get a type of person. And this is just that next element that to embrace.
Yeah.
So with that theory, with that logic, if you could understand that next part of it, that should be able to kind of bring on that next wave of innovation and change.
Just thinking, we've all, in terms of, and this is probably touches more on culture than anything else, but we've even kind of seen it in, you think about fintechs, where you talk about, you know, disrupting the marketplace. But even if you think about old school banking, it's typically called, you know, old boys club, right?
Yeah.
Mates, no mates. You bring, you know, your family through, and then your mates, and then they bring their family through and their mates, and it's all from the same backgrounds. Whereas if you look at a lot of fintechs, it is just, you know, people thinking outside the box and trying to do things differently. And I think the atmosphere's in that as well. It's not, you know, pinstripe suits and, you know, top buttons done up. It's jeans and a t-shirt and let's just make it happen. So I think it's, you can already see it happening, and I think this is just the next wave of it.
Yeah, it's a movement.
The next step.
It's
just constantly evolving.
Yeah, I think you're right, 100% right. Because I even go back to when I started working, and you know, people were still being employed wherever they come from, but it definitely wasn't spoken about as much. And it's only now that this whole kind of, I think there's a huge flurry when it comes to technology and communication. Social media has made a massive impact in that. You see a lot of negative kind of impressions of racial kind of abuse or whatever it may be. And everyone's trying to kind of really do better at all of these kind of aspects of things, to be more inclusive, to be a better human, ultimately. And actually, when you really break it down, that's what diversity inclusion really is at the butt of it all. It's just be a better bloody human.
Yeah, it's so true. It's something that you think everyone should do anyway, and everyone thinks they do.
Why would you discriminate against someone just because they can't spell? Or like, you know, they don't think like you do, or don't process information the way you do? Are they worse than you because of that? Do you look down at them because of that?
Yeah. That's the point. It's how do you keep that going, and how do you combat those and educate people? I think that's a big part of it as well, is that, like you said, it's just the education of it. Because if people don't understand things, they go, okay, I don't understand it, I don't really want to get too involved, I'll see what other people are doing.
Yeah, there's that fear of misstepping or saying the wrong thing or doing something wrong because you're not knowledgeable enough on the subject.
Well, we felt this kind of walking into this conversation.
Yeah.
Literally.
I was
it's
nervous.
kind of like, oh my God. You get a lot of
heavy.
Heavy.
It's really heavy. It is.
It does remind me, actually, there was someone that I talked to quite a lot that one of their family members got ADHD. And it's quite sad how much it can affect a family if they can't get the support, particularly with children. You know, because they're too difficult to deal with, and all the other behavioural kind of issues that, you know, children kind of display with particular types of ADHD, autism, whatever it may be. And then, okay, there's kind of good professionals there to try to help, but that's challenging. And if they haven't got the right kind of education, the right understanding to how to deal with these individuals, it's very hard to find people that will help. And they want to shy away from it and kind of go, oh, this is your problem, not mine.
Yeah. It's about, I think, teaching the child how to support themselves as well. Yeah. What works for you, what doesn't, what stresses you out, what doesn't, how do you learn best, so they can kind of carry that through life as well. But yeah, I think a lot of it starts at childhood, and family life can be very, very difficult, not just with children, but as children. The reason I kind of said about school and kind of growing up is because as children become adults, depending on the severity of your neurodiversity, it can still impact your family even as an adult.
Completely.
You know, and you can still very much be limited, whether it's in employment, whether it's socially, whether it's
general life. It's such an impact on general life, especially at the kind of far end of the spectrum as well.
Yeah, we've got a family member he's neurodivergent, like literally, and he's 18, and they've known about it since he was about 5, and he's progressed and he's changed, but they've had to really understand how to kind of get the most out of him as a young adult. Yeah. Because now it's like you're not in that kind of bubble of school anymore. Yeah. You're out in the world, and you're just kind of going around London and getting on trains and dealing with people, and there's a lot of can happen in a very simple kind of commute that we would take for granted, that he also takes for granted, but for the wrong reasons. And funny enough, he's being supported. So he's actually managed to find himself like a full-time job. They did all the skills assessment and what have you, and he's got a job within a hospital. So he starts in September, and they are fully aware of his kind of, I don't want to use the word condition, but his kind of neurodivergent,
his needs.
Yeah. And they found him a role that will actually kind of bed into his specific kind of needs that kind of benefit what they need as a hospital and benefit what he needs as like a young adult.
Yeah.
And he's getting paid for it.
Definitely. You know, similar, pretty much identical story in terms of, you know, I've got a family member with, you know, similar kind of neurodivergent needs where not as socially involved, isn't, you know, the loudest person, but they're kind of gone, okay, the local hospital have kind of gone, okay, we need someone part-time who can kind of do X, Y and Z. It's what you really enjoy and what you've told us you like, so you can do that. And rather than kind of feeling, because you can imagine, it's difficult to say, but if you're not in employment, you know, can you feel like a burden on your friends, your family, you know, everything else? Whereas by actually having the awareness and enabling people to get into work, you make people feel less like a burden, where they're actually putting their skills to good use. And to think through that, you can see already from when she's been doing it that automatically now you can see she's more outgoing and is more able to kind of, and just more confident. And you see, okay, your personality is coming out a lot more because you feel like you're supported.
Yeah.
That's literally why, in my last position, why the project that I worked on existed, because it was around the importance of kind of structure, routine, having something to work towards. It wasn't just, we've got a lot of people in the country that aren't working, let's get them into work. It was actually around kind of how there are studies, it's called IPS, if you kind of want to look into it, but there are studies around the fact that being in employment and having goals to work towards is so beneficial for you, mentally, physically, you know, emotionally. Having a routine every day, having goals to work towards, earning your own money, you know, being able to reward yourself, being socially active with people, you know, there is science behind how good it is for your soul, really, and that's kind of like a real life example of why this project existed, you know.
Definitely. It's that accessibility as well, right? It's how can you, it's all well and good saying this is what we need to do and this is what would be great, but it's having, you know, organisations like that charity and like what companies are doing. I know a number of, I think Ford have got, in the US have got a programme that's targeted around helping people with Down syndrome, I believe, getting into employment and then giving them kind of life skills. And, you know, it's how do you actually go around putting things in place to make it accessible for people's well-being as well. So,
crazy cool stuff.
Yeah.
Let's see what the future kind of holds, then, shall we? But I think it's good. And it's nice to have you just chatting about it from what you see it firsthand. I think that's what was quite interesting, just to have that chat with you on this today. Even though it was a tough discussion.
A little bit. It's a heavy discussion.
It was, but it's good. And I think it's good for, again, it's just good for us to start those conversations, isn't it?
Yeah, it's important to talk about it and to learn, to keep learning.
Keep learning.
I'm sure we will.
Embrace it, understand it.
Yeah.
Break stigmas.
Be inclusive.
And be a trailblazer, innit?
Yeah.
There you go. There's your key takeaways for the day. 5 steps.
Definitely.
Nice one.
Nice.
All right, guys. Thanks very much. That was really good.
Yeah, enjoyed it.
Thanks for having me.
Until next time.
Until next time.